Hey, welcome to Type Evolution. I'm Olympia and I'm going to share with you my unpopular opinions in regards to the Enneagram and instincts. So if you don't know, I have been obsessed with personality type theory for around 10 years now, and I've also been running a blog for several years and making videos about the subject. And all this time I have also gathered certain unpopular opinions, hot takes, if you will. So let's just jump into it, shall we? Okay, number one, Enneagram type is not nurture and it is not trauma. I've noticed that a lot of people assume that certain negative life experiences or childhood experiences made them a specific Enneagram type. It's true that trauma amplifies the negative aspects of your personality. So when you've gone through trauma, you will in a way automatically deal with more negative emotions. Especially when we go to the unhealthier levels of the Enneagram types, the very, very dark ones. Those are usually caused by trauma, by negative experiences in your life. In that sense, okay, I can see why people make that connection. However, the type itself is inborn. At least it has been my observation. The type itself is nature. You are born with your Enneagram type or types. However, especially the unhealthiest levels will be representative of the stereotypes, the negative stereotypes of the Enneagram types. So people can identify the most with those negative stereotypes when they are unhealthy and when they have been dealing with trauma. However, once you overcome your trauma, once you have dealt with your trauma, then you might find that you maybe have mistyped yourself, or to some extent just find it difficult to type yourself after that. So there is a bit of a learning curve there. I have to make a bit of a caveat though. Yes, I have seen and experienced that people in the same kind of family can adopt certain similar, you could say, limiting beliefs that derive from certain Enneagram types. But those are usually from the parents. So what I've noticed as the most common pattern is people, well, mostly the children of those parents, sort of adopting a little bit the attitude or limiting beliefs of those parents. So for example, if the parent is a type 3 and the other parent has a 3 wing as well, then naturally the child will be more influenced by it. But it won't really be the true nature of the child or the true nature of that person. So once that person has, you could say, emancipated themselves mentally and emotionally from those parents, then those inclinations will actually disappear, or they will go into the far, far background. And then the real type and the real personality will emerge. So if you feel like nurture has a big influence on your personality, first look at, okay, how much are you still suffering from trauma? And also, how much have you been able to mentally and emotionally somewhat disconnect from your parents' viewpoints and beliefs and behaviors? If you're still struggling with those two aspects, then yeah, you will probably mistype yourself, or you will feel like trauma and nurture has made your Enneagram type. But that's not the case. Okay, this is really a big hot take actually. I think that Enneagram subtypes create mistypes. Now, what are the Enneagram subtypes? This is mostly for those of you who know about the subtypes that are mostly described in the book from Beatrice Chestnut, where she combines instinct and Enneagram type and then makes it a subtype. You might have heard terminology such as countertype, yeah, Enneagram subtype. And in my experience, just dealing with the theory and having clients and also with myself, I had to come to the conclusion that the subtype theory is just oftentimes too misleading. Now, I'm not saying it's like entirely wrong and misguided. However, I find that it creates more mistypes than it helps. And it just is not that useful, in my opinion at least. I used to be a big fan of Beatrice Chestnut's book, and I still think it's a good book. However, I just don't find it useful in my own practice at all. So I don't use the subtype theory much at all, at least in the Enneagram sense. I do that with the Jungian types, but that's a different subject. When it comes to the Enneagram, I totally disregard it, to be honest. I kind of have it in the background. I'm aware of some of the subtype theory with Enneagram, but I choose to mostly ignore it because I just get people being like, oh, I'm a social 7, I'm a sexual 4 or whatever. And then they say, this is my subtype, or I'm a counter type, and how does it go along with the type, etc. And they say, I often see in the comments stuff like, yeah, I can relate to, I don't know, being a sexual 6 and a self-preservation 9 and things like that. And to me, none of that really makes sense. The thing is, you need to, at least in my opinion, type your Enneagram and your instincts totally separately. Because if you are not able to type them separately, something is off, something is wrong. You should be able to relate to the instinct, whatever your Enneagram type is. Of course, your Enneagram type and the rest of your personality will influence how your instinct comes about, but still, I think it's best to just focus on what are your instincts, what is the instinctual order. Just forget about Enneagram types for a while, whilst you're figuring out your instincts. And this should give you the best result, in my opinion. Okay, the next one in the vein of instincts. The blind spot isn't always blind. It is just unvalued or unsatisfying. I often see people saying, oh yeah, I'm just blind in this instinct, or this person must be blind in it, or this person is not blind in that instinct, and that means it cannot be their last instinct. I see that mostly with extroverts who actually have a social instinct last, especially if it's like an extrovert with a feeling component, like an extrovert who just tends to be good with people. These are oftentimes the EF extrovert, especially ESFJ and ESFP extroverts in the Jungian system. They can still be social instinct last, especially ESFPs in my experience. So then people will be like, oh, this person is being sociable and things like that. You can be good at certain instincts even that are lower in your stacking. So you can even be good at a last instinct, you can be good at a second instinct, maybe even better than your first instinct. It's totally possible. What the order mostly describes is how much you value each instinct, how much it satisfies you on an instinctual, fundamental level. So yes, there is a trend that because something, if it is your last instinct, you will naturally try to forego it in favor of your other instincts. So naturally, you will be more inclined to focus more on your first or second instinct. And then the third one is just like an afterthought. And in that sense, it can appear to be a blind spot because you just prioritize it differently. However, not everyone operates from their most natural functioning. And this kind of goes back to like trauma and, you know, your environment and negative experiences. We can be in situations where we are forced to focus on aspects of our personalities that don't come naturally to us. And this can happen with the last instinct. Some people, I mean, a lot of people obsess over their last instinct for whatever reason. Maybe they are really unhappy with how the things in their first instinct are going, so they try to distract themselves by focusing on the last instinct. Or perhaps just based on the rest of their personality, the last instinct seems to be better for them. Like it seems to be easier. Like I said, especially ESFJ, ESFP people, even when they have the social instinct last, they tend to still be pretty good at it simply because of the rest of their personality structure. So it really depends. This is why I feel that saying something is a blind spot is not that useful when talking about the last instinct. That's why I prefer just dropping that concept, because in practice, people can really focus on their last instinct sometimes a lot. And it kind of goes and comes. It's like kind of can come in waves and cycles, especially also with women and their menstrual cycle. I talk more about like the dynamics with the instincts and everything in my course Emotional Ease, and I also talk more about the Enneagram types, my take on them, and how they're ego types in my course Emotional Ease. So I recommend to you, if you're struggling with negative emotions and you want to figure out what it all means, especially in regards to your instincts, your personality, etc., then I would recommend you to check out my course, because we'll also prime you to get better at dealing with relationships and other people. Anyway, I would recommend to avoid or just ignore the whole blind spot concept and instead just focus on which instinctual order suits your values or what fulfills you deep down. I know this can be hard to figure out. You might have to get a typing session with me. Okay, next point. There are no balanced wings in Enneagram types. This is just my opinion, my observation, but people who claim that they have balanced wings, in my opinion, doesn't really make sense. And I have not observed that. What I have observed is people can just be mainly their main type, or that main type that we're talking about. So let's say someone can be just a type 9, and the 9-ness can be so strong that the wings are very much in the background and you can barely tell that the person has a wing, but they will still have one wing over the other. We humans are primed towards focusing. I actually also recently read a book from Robert Greene, Mastery, where he talks about how humans develop this perspective, this visual perspective of being able to focus, not just visually, also mentally being able to focus, which made them different from animals, right? From other animals, let's say. Whereas other animals, especially the ones that have like eyes on the sides, right? They have a panoramic view. So they tend to see better like from that perspective, but they're not that good at seeing in that kind of focus, right? To the front. And this is similar with, I see how our personalities are. So we tend to focus. We just tend to focus. We tend to have one primary thing and maybe a bit of a secondary. It's the same, you see that same pattern with the Jungian personalities. You see that people are mainly introverted or mainly extroverted. There is some focus there. We are not truly ambiverted. Yes, we have another tendency. So an introvert also has an extroverted tendency, but that's it. In conclusion, I would say if you feel like you have balanced wings, you probably don't really know your true type, or you're kind of not sure what the actual type is. Or you might be one of these people, which I have come across. I've had a client like that, where their main type is so pronounced that the wing comes out in a very subtle way, or the person is not going into their wing much at all. So I knew like a 9-wing 8 client who had that. Like he was mainly a 9, and he did have a bit of the 8 tendency, but it didn't come out as much. So you should really try to figure that out. You know, like don't just say, oh, I have balanced wings and just whatever. No, you most likely have a certain tendency. And even if it's very weak, even if you don't go into it as much, then all right, then that's just how it is. Yeah, so some people have the reverse problem actually, where their wing is very, very strong. And it almost seems like their wing is their main type because they go into their wing type so much. So I see both of these extremes. I see people who are very removed from their wing but still have a wing, and I see people who are very into their wing to the point it could almost seem like their main type. So you kind of have to see what applies to you there. And I think that also ties in nicely in the next point, which is your main Enneagram type is not always the most crucial one. I see this especially when people go through certain life stages, when they transition from one life stage to another, or when they are caught up in certain situations that bring out one aspect of the personality more than other times or other situations. So what do I mean, right? Like I often say, okay, when you are a teenager, you basically tend to focus more on your image or sadness type. It is just part of that life stage. And if you deal with situations, let's say, that temper with your security or your sense of security, your felt security, you will be plunged into the mechanisms of your fear type. And that doesn't even mean that fear, or the fear type, the mind type, is your main type. You could just be caught up in certain situations that bring out that type in you more. Now, I have to also make this disclaimer because I know there's the Catherine Forward theory of tri-type out there, and you do need to be, I think, licensed in a way, or you know, there's some kind of copyright around it. So I don't really use tri-type theory itself that much anymore, but what I do take from it, or what I've also noticed with other theories, is the tri-fix approach, where you have one type out of each center. So you have an anger type, a fear type, and a sadness type. That's how I deal with the Enneagram. And depending on the certain situation you are in, depending on the certain life stage you are in, you might have to resolve one type more than your main type even. And I guess a bit of a personal admission, I think I mentioned this in other videos already, but I used to type as a type 4 for a very long time. But I've come to the realization that it wasn't my main type. It mostly came from, growing up as a teenager. Naturally, I was more focused on the image or sadness type. Also, my family has a lot of image or sadness types in them that also influenced me. So that all brought me into focusing more on my sadness or image type, which is 4. However, once I grew up, once I matured, once I became more independent, and once I worked on myself and worked on what I assessed to be type 4 issues, I came to the point where I felt like, oh, okay, I have mastered it, right? I felt like I had reached some level of personal development. And this is actually also when I started coaching. But over time, I realized, hold on a minute, there have been all these other issues that I didn't really tackle or deal with, and that had always been in the background, and that was actually type 9 stuff. And that's how I realized, okay, actually I was type 9 as a main type, but I still do not regret mistyping as a 4. I mean, I guess it's obviously not good if you proclaim to be something and it is inaccurate, right? From that perspective, I wished I would have known better, I suppose. But at the same time, I value this experience because I think it makes it easier for me now to see also why other people mistype themselves. And I also want to give people some encouragement to not be so scared of mistyping yourself. I know I say that a lot, like mistyping, blah, blah, and make it like seem this overly bad thing. But especially when it comes to Enneagram, I think if you type at least your specific fear or anger or sadness type correctly, it can actually be a good thing, even if it's not your main type. So if you do that correctly and you deal with those issues whenever they come up or when you're in a certain life stage, then you will still have gathered wisdom, you will have still developed yourself in a positive way, and then it's probably easier to tackle the main type, which is usually the most daunting. It is usually your, you could say, shadow self, the things you want to avoid. So it's kind of normal to not be able to access your main Enneagram type right away. Yeah, so I actually think it's totally fine to focus on other types, but you really need to be somewhat strategic about it. You need to know what you're doing, and it really has to depend on what kind of emotional issue you want to resolve. And once again, I talk more about that in my course, Emotional Ease. This is a bonus hot take, and this is mostly for those of you who are both very much into Enneagram and Jungian personality types. Not every Jungian type can be every Enneagram type. Yeah, this is my take. Okay, see you next video now. Okay, I'm gonna elaborate a little bit. I know we want to be able to say, oh, you can have every kind of motivation, you can have every kind of combination, etc., etc. But in reality, it's not really the case. Maybe theoretically, yes, but like I said, in reality, not really. It's creating, the dreaded mistyping or just too much of an inaccuracy. At least when it comes to main type, okay? When it comes to your main Enneagram type, the first one, the main one, it cannot be just any combination. Even the combination of the other fixes is not entirely random either. And I have made blog posts that show you which types correlate with which which Enneagram type goes with which Jungian type and all the combination stuff. You can check out my blog posts to really see all the combinations. But in this video, I just want to say that, there are just too many contradictions. And Jungian type and Enneagram type are closely interlinked. I still think that they are somewhat separate, somewhat different. But still, there are some combinations that are just not possible. Because, they just don't exist in real life. you can think of it in a theoretical bubble, sort of like you can think, okay, maybe unicorns could exist, right? Dragons maybe could exist. Can maybe theoretically in your fantasy world come up with certain combinations, and you can maybe even come up with some kind of scientific explanation. You also see that with like mermaids, right? Like people come up with like all these little mini theories about how mermaids could be real. And this is the same thing with like a type 5 in the Enneagram who's an extrovert in the Jungian system. It's the same thing. It's like trying to explain or come up with some kind of reasoning behind why this combination could be possible in real life. But at the end of the day, it's just not real. It's just not a thing. It just doesn't make any sense. Type 5s are inherently introverted. The entire psyche of the type 5 is introverted. And it just makes zero sense to say, oh, I am a 5, but I'm also an extrovert. There's a deep misunderstanding there between extroversion and introversion. And I would recommend you to really try to resolve that, either with my help or just with your own, research. It just doesn't work. Like you cannot be inherently focused on the self internally and be an extrovert who is primarily focused on the external. It just makes no sense, okay? The type 5 and extrovert combination is one of the most clear, but there are others where people say, oh yeah, but you can argue that it's still possible. Okay, fair enough. I acknowledge that with some types, I give it a bit more leeway. So the types where I give it a bit more leeway when it comes to at least introversion, extroversion is like type 6, even though type 6 is almost always introverted. And with type 1, even though they're also almost always introverted. With all the other types, I've seen a very strict introverted, extroverted, positioning, combination, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, so certain things just don't go with each other. And yeah, sorry to burst your bubble, but it's just how it is in reality. And the sooner you are able to accept this, the better you will be with actually dealing with your true personality. Now, if you're just like trying out like fun little theories here and there, okay, fair enough. But if you actually want to work on yourself and you actually want to get somewhere with personality type, then I would advise you to be honest with yourself and be a bit more selective and a bit more, I guess, categorical with your approach if you want to combine both of the systems and gain the most out of both of them. Yeah, what else can I say? I mean, there's still going to be people out there who will argue with me, maybe in the comments, and say, oh, I'm a type 4 and I can be an ENFP. Well, if you think you are type 4 and ENFP, like genuinely, in my experience, what's the most likely case, you're actually an INFP who has like what I call an extroverted, ambiverted extroversion subtype, like extroverted intuition subtype, which can make you seem more ambiverted, but you are actually still INFP with the type 4. Or you could be an ENFP, but type 4 could be one of your so-called fixes, and your main type is probably a different one. Or maybe it's your wing type even, maybe you're actually a 3-wing 4. So these combinations are possible. You really have to look at it, individually. So if you have trouble with this, you can also reach out to me and get typed by me. All right, this is all for this video. It's a long one. I hope you enjoyed it, and let me know what you think. And please like this video if you liked it, because there will be people out there who will hate my hot takes. So I will get dislikes probably. Anyway, okay, see you in the next video. Bye.